Iran and the US reached a ceasefire just recently, but things already look shaky. Now, in just the last few hours, Israel has bombed Lebanon, absolutely smashed them, which Iran is clearly not okay with. I mean, not many people in the world are. Iran has now threatened to shut the Strait of Hormuz again. Every single hour, something is changing. The situation is so volatile right now that honestly nothing feels reliable. At the same time, media channels are reporting completely conflicting updates. And can you really blame them? Even Trump himself hasn't exactly been a transparent source of information. So, right now, we're all drowning in noise and trying to make sense of what is actually going on. And I know we all have the same questions. What happens next? Is this war actually ending? Who wins? Who loses? And more importantly, what does this mean for the global economy? But most importantly, your money, your family, the people you care about. I'm not here to take sides, any sides at all. I'm on your side. I'm on your economic side because I know your economics lead into your family situation and your personal situation. Now, what if I told you that we can actually answer these questions using economics and scenario testing? Specifically, what they call game theory. It sounds a bit absurd, right? But hear me out. There is a game theory expert. You can call him an economist, a forecaster, whatever you want, who has been talking about this exact conflict well before it started. He built out different scenarios using data, using economic behavior, and predicted how this war could unfold. Now, the crazy part is that so far, a lot of what has been predicted by this person between Iran, Israel, and the US, he has actually got it right. I actually watched his analysis a couple of weeks ago, and since then, every new development that comes out, I keep thinking this is exactly what he said would happen on a probability basis. Now, of course, nobody can predict the future perfectly. We don't have a crystal ball. We can't line up every single little detail. But what we can do is estimate outcomes utilizing that data. And what's interesting is that he no longer is the only one saying this. As the war has progressed, more and more economists, more war analysts, and more geopolitical experts are starting to align with these same predictions that he has had a long time ago. So, here's what we're going to do in this video for you and on behalf of you. I am going to break this down into two clear scenarios. I've done all the research, I've joined the dots so that you don't have to. Now, first, what we're going to do is we're going to look at what happens if the ceasefire holds. Second, what happens if it breaks. And then there's one outcome that shows up in both scenarios, something that could fundamentally reshape the way the world works. And I don't mean that as a dramatic line. I generally mean it because every major war in history has reshaped global power. World War I did it. World War II did it. This war will do the same, but maybe not in the way most people expect. So, in this video, I'm going to discuss who this expert is, why he has gone viral globally, and why his predictions have been so accurate so far. But most importantly, what he thinks happens next. Not just for the war, but for the global economy, global inflation, national economies, and also this will all flow back to you, your wallet, your family, and the people that you care about. So, you know that I cover property, the economy, the global economy, the local economy here in Australia, the property market here in Australia, money movements, your money. I do these videos every single day so that you can make the right moves for yourself and the people you care about. This is your daily property update. Make sure to hit the subscribe button. I will be following everything as this unfolds every single day. So I look forward to your participation. So let's look at what's happening right now. Because on paper, yes, there is a ceasefire between Iran and the US, but it already looks very, very unstable. Israel has continued bombing Lebanon, which Iran has clearly said is not acceptable under the conditions of the ceasefire. And at the same time, Iran is already warning that multiple terms of the agreement have been violated. On top of that, Iran has once again brought up the possibility of closing the Strait of Hormuz again. So no one knows what direction this war actually goes from here, and whether we are looking at the end of something or just the beginning of a much longer phase. Now, in the middle of all of this uncertainty, there is a very interesting angle that has started gaining traction, and it comes from this economist, this game theory economist I've been talking about. Now, this analyst has been analyzing this conflict using data behavioral economics and patterns and how nations behave under pressure. And I want you to think about this for a second, because if you understand how countries make decisions when their economy, their resources, and their power are at stake, then you are not just guessing anymore. You are starting to model behavior, and that is exactly what game theory tries to do. Now, this expert has been talking about this conflict well before it started, and he mapped out scenarios based on how each player is likely to act in this game. What is surprising is that so far, a lot of what has unfolded between Iran, Israel, and the US has aligned with what he has described, and his core argument is very simple but very important. This was never going to be a short war. He predicted that this conflict would be prolonged, not just in terms of military action, but also in terms of economic warfare. So even if missiles stop, the war itself does not really end because sanctions, trade disruptions, oil politics, and financial pressure will continue in the background. So whether there is a ceasefire or not, the conflict doesn't just disappear, it changes form. This is a key reason why we need to think in scenarios, not just outcomes. Let's assume for a moment that the ceasefire holds and negotiations move forward. Once the fighting slows down, the real battle shifts into negotiations. And these negotiations are not quick or clean. Every country involved comes in with its own conditions, its own demands, and its own strategic objectives. So even in a peace scenario, there is no instant resolution. Now, the question is, who will benefit from this negotiation? Who will be the winner of this conflict? Iran is one of the biggest beneficiaries in this situation because this conflict has demonstrated very clearly that Iran cannot be easily subdued even by the most powerful military in the world unless this military commits hundreds of thousands of troops on the ground going to Iran, and it will be an absolute disaster. That will not happen. But more importantly, this war has exposed where Iran's real power actually sits. For years, everyone focused on nuclear weapons. But what this conflict has already shown is that Iran already had a different kind of weapon, and that is control over the Strait of Hormuz. Now, historically, the Strait of Hormuz was treated as a shared global passage, but this war has changed that perception completely. What we are seeing right now is a quiet global acceptance that Iran effectively controls this choke point. That is a massive win for Iran. Iran will also start introducing tolls or stricter oversight over the strait, which creates a long-term economic advantage and gives Iran leverage that goes far beyond just this conflict. Now, Russia will also benefit not directly from the war itself, but from the shift in global focus. As attention moves away from Ukraine, the pressure of sanctions and scrutiny weakens, and Russia gains strategic breathing room in a distracted global environment. Now let's look at who loses. The Gulf countries, they lose big time, including places like the UAE, Qatar, and others have long been seen as safe, stable economic hubs. But this conflict exposes how vulnerable the region actually is. If tensions can escalate this quickly and infrastructure can be targeted, then the perception of safety is permanently damaged, and that has long-term consequences for investment, migration, and the economic stability of this area. And then there is the US. After World War II, the US has been seen as the dominant global superpower. But this conflict challenges that perception too, because it shows that even overwhelming military strength does not guarantee control or compliance. If the US is forced into compromise rather than decisive victory, that signals a shift in how power is viewed globally. Okay, so now let's consider the other scenario because it is just as likely. What if this ceasefire does not hold? Now, if things escalate again, then we move deeper into the kind of prolonged conflict that this game theory analysis was pointing towards from the start. And the key issue with escalation today is that war is no longer just about military strength. It is about endurance, supply chains, economic capacity, and the ability to sustain pressure over time. So if this conflict drags on, it becomes more expensive, more complex, and more destabilizing. Not just for the countries directly involved, but for the entire global system, and the regime in Iran is counting on that. If escalation continues, there is a real possibility of stronger military moves like targeting critical assets such as K Island to try and pressure Iran further, and that kind of move would send shockwaves through the global oil industry. Yes, you would see an immediate spike in oil prices. But the bigger risk is structural damage to infrastructure, which could disrupt supply for 5 to 10 years, maybe even longer. And this is the kind of setback to global growth and GDP that the world is simply not prepared for right now. If we head this way, I'll cover the scenario in more depth. For now, let's hope it doesn't get to that. Now, let's talk about the most important prediction of this video. There will be a new world order that no one saw coming. For a long time, the global system has operated under a very clear assumption that the US dominates and that military power ultimately determines outcomes. That assumption has been obliterated by this war. We've seen it in Russia and Ukraine, and now we're seeing it with US and Iran. Power is becoming more distributed, regional blocs are becoming stronger, so many countries are becoming less dependent on global systems, trade routes are being questioned, and diversification is becoming a priority rather than an option. Globalization will not just disappear, but it becomes slower, more fragile, more uncertain, and more broken into regional chunks around the world. And most importantly, military strength alone is no longer enough to dictate outcomes. Economic resilience, control over resources, and strategic positioning are becoming far more important. So when people talk about a new world order, this is what they mean. It is not about one country replacing another, but it is more about the system itself becoming more complex, more fragmented, and less predictable. The calm and peace up here on the Magic Mountain in Davos is at stark contrast to a world whose old order is unraveling at breathtaking pace. And I'm going to tell you, for us here in Australia, we are going to need wise, smart, experienced leaders to help this country navigate this new world. Now, let's bring this back to something very real. What does all of this mean for the global economy? And more importantly, what does it mean for you? Even if the ceasefire holds and things stabilize faster than expected, the economic impact of this conflict does not disappear overnight. Oil prices are likely to remain elevated because supply chains have been disrupted, and that disruption is going to last 6 to 12 months minimum, even if they wrap this thing up in the next 24 hours. Infrastructure has been permanently damaged, and countries will prioritize rebuilding reserves instead of increasing supply to the market. If Iran strengthens its control over the Strait of Hormuz or introduces tolls that adds another layer of cost to global trade. Now, at the same time, other oil-producing countries are not incentivized to increase production because higher prices means bigger profits for them. So they can hold back on that supply and they can actually make more money. We're seeing that in the housing market in Australia. Our housing market is going ballistic because of a lack of supply. They'll do this with oil globally. All of this feeds directly into inflation, slower economic growth, and increased pressure on individual households here at home in Australia, but all over the Western world. So this war will 100%, no matter what the outcome is going to be, will change the world forever. Power is changing. Systems are changing, and the effects of that shift are going to be felt across economies, markets, and everyday lives. So the question is no longer just what happens next in this conflict. The question is whether we understand the kind of world that is going to emerge from it. Now, if you want me to keep breaking this down as things develop, make sure you subscribe because this is moving fast and the next phase could change everything. What can we do everyday ordinary Aussies? Well, when we build communities, when we get together, when we have a shared voice, this makes our politicians take note. So I appreciate everyone that subscribes to the channel, and I generally read every single comment. Leave a comment. Let me know what you think about this unfolding situation. I'll see you guys at the next